In the spirit of reconciliation, New South Wales State Archives acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So basically what we're going to cover is what we already know about the land, setting the scene, looking at parish maps, looking at valuation records from the New South Wales Valuer General, looking at deceased estate files from the Stamp Duty Office, primary applications that we hold, primary applications available on the Historical Land Record Viewer, and also where you might find information to give you context for your property. So today's talk follows on from previous ones we've given, which were on how to read a parish map, reading certificates of title, old system versus Torrens title, pre-1856 land records. It assumes that you have some understanding of how a parish map works, and importantly, some understanding of how old system title differs from Torrens title. So if you find these concepts a bit difficult, please go back after this webinar and have a look at those prior webinars. Now, there are lots of guides to help you with your land research. Some of these guides are on the New South Wales Land Registry website. Some of these guides are on our State Archives website. You can always come into the reading room and the staff will assist you as much as they can. There's also Terry Cass's book, Unlocking Land, a guide to Crown land records held at the State Archives. Thank you, Terry, for this valuable guide. So what do we already know about the land? Well, often you only have street name and number and suburb. You might know the present-day local government area. But you need to be wary because street names change over time. Properties in a street can be renumbered. And indeed, many early suburbs of Sydney particularly don't use street numbers, they use house names. And also localities can change their name over time. Local government areas change their boundaries or they amalgamate with other areas. It's always easier when researching land to work backwards in time, especially if researching old system titles. So we're going to use a case study for this talk, and that case study is the property we're on at the moment, 161 O'Connell Street, Kingswood. And that was originally an old system titled property. So we're going to start off with some of the aerial photographs from 6 maps. So this is the most recent one that comes up, and it shows the suburb of Claremont Meadows to the east, the suburb of Cadens, which is being developed to the west. The University of Western Sydney is to our north. And the curvy lines that you can see just on the top to the left is the old drive-in. Now, I've put an unbroken yellow line to show you O'Connell Street, which is an unusual street because it has a 90-degree turn in it. When you're driving along O'Connell Street from the Great Western Highway, people often get tempted to go along what's called O'Connell Lane, which I've shown by the dotted yellow line. But it's not O'Connell Street, that one is O'Connell Lane. So here's a slightly earlier aerial photograph, and this is before Cadens was developed to our west. And you can see the curved lines of the drive-in a little bit better, just up there. And of course, our buildings are here in the centre. This is the 1943 aerial photographs of Sydney, are available on 6 maps, and you can superimpose them on the present-day map. So here you can see our building, even though it wasn't built to the 1970s, and the land surrounding it as it was in 1943. Although only the 1943 images are up on 6, you can actually purchase more recent aerial photographs from Spatial Services on their website. Now we look at the parish maps. And here we have one of the earliest of the maps of the parish of Claremont, and it's showing that this area was a grant to Mary O'Connell, 1,055 acres. And coincidentally, another woman named Mary Putland, has 600 acres to the north. This is the third edition of the parish map, and there has been things happening. The original grant is shown in a dark, unbroken line, but the broken lines are further subdivisions that have occurred. Now, we've got a couple of things on this map. We've got the Cumberland Register 2, Folio 31, which is a reference to the grant. We've got the reference again to the Roll Plan 379. We've got Mary O'Connell's name, and we've got, I think it's Cole Lee as the name of the property, or it could be Cole T. We've got the top of O'Connell Street, where it comes in from the Great Western Highway. Somebody has written the name Frogmore Road along it. Where O'Connell Lane is now are the words right of way, so it wasn't actually a proper street, it was just a right of way. And somebody else has also penciled in a name covering the area where we are now, which is Musicos. And here we have the 5th edition of the Parish of Claremont, used as the regional charting map. And again, someone has penciled in on it the very different street layout of Claremont Meadows with its lots of curves. We also now have a Crown Plan number for O'Connell Lane, and we'll go along to have a look at that in a minute. And we also have in those round circles lots of reference notes that lead you to Government Gazette notices or to DP numbers, deposited plan maps, and so on. Now, I know that I always enthuse about road plans, Crown plans of roads, and normally they are really, really nice, but this one is probably one of the less impressive ones. But it's 1973, O'Connell's Lane is being formed, and you can see the original laneway right-of-way has been widened. And it does show you a little bit of information about some of the properties alongside that O'Connell Lane. And now we're coming on to the Land Title Office charting map for the parish of Claremont. Again, all of these are available on Historic Land Record Viewer, except for the Crown plans that have to be purchased from the info brokers or viewed at State Archives. Now, there are some funny numbers written on top of this charting map that start with U. These are the numbers for the Central Mapping Authority maps, and these are also available on HLRV. And this does actually give us a clue now, because it shows us that the area near 1601 O'Connell Street was primary application 45280. So let's have a look at the grant, because we know that Mary O'Connell got the grant. So there's a couple of places we can find the grant indexes. On the Historical Land Records Viewer itself, on Ancestry, because they've digitised the grants that we have on microfilm here. And there is an index to early grants on our website, and that covers basically up to mainland to 1822, and then the County of Cumberland from 1823 to 1865. And we have 4 women whose first name is Mary, who got a grant in what was then called the Evan District. Mary Collett, Mary Putland and Mary King in 1807, and Mary O'Connell in 1810. Now we're actually going to go and have a look at that reference for Mary O'Connell, which is on microfilm reel 2561. Again, it tells us it was granted on the 27th of June 1810, and she would have to start paying quit rent in 1815, and it gives a description of the property, what the other properties are around it, and the length of the boundaries. But of course, as I said, this is referring to it as the district of Evan because there were no parish names in use at that early time. So here is the grant as showing on the Historic Land Records Viewer. Again, Evan District, 1,055 acres, Mrs. Mary O'Connell. But what's different here, the wording of the description is the same, but what's different here is that somebody has written down the primary application numbers onto the original copy of the grant from the HLRV. We have a lot of people who come in and say they want to start off with a grant and go forward in time, and that's the hardest way to trace land. But this grant would give you some clues and you could look up those primary application numbers. Now, there are indexes on Historic Land Record Viewer. There's a vendor's index to old system. There's a purchase index that only starts in 1896. There's a conditional purchase index that's 1896 and a deposited deeds index. I should just warn you that particularly with the vendors prior to 1898 and the old system purchases prior to 1908, they're not strictly alphabetical. So they'll be alphabetical for surnames only and then basically in date or number order. And here are some examples of those vendors index and of the purchasers index. Vendors gives you the name of the person who's selling, the name of the person buying, the certificate of title number, and the description of the land as used by the land title people. So it's not going to be street numbers, street names, etc., or suburbs. It's going to be parishes, counties, portion numbers. The purchasers index doesn't show you who sold the land, only who bought the land. There is also an index to Torrens title purchases on HLRV as well. Again, similarly, it gives you your vol-fol numbers, what type of instrument it is, a mortgage, a transfer. It doesn't tell you who sold, only who bought, and it uses the land title description as rather than using street numbers or names. So I want to take you to the Valuer General's valuation cards and valuation rolls, because this is one place where you may be able to link up a street name and number to a certificate of title detail and to the original land title portion numbers. But you need to be aware that the Valuation of Land Act starts in 1916. It only gets applied to a local government area when the area adopts the Act. So it starts out in Manly in 1918, but it doesn't get to Broken Hill to the 1980s. Valuation areas are local government areas, so boundaries can change, amalgamations occur, and the records move with those amalgamations within the series. It can be arranged by the whole local government area, or can be divided into subsections called wards or ridings, or it can be divided into villages or parishes. And generally, once you've got to the area you want, it's by street, but then it's up one side of the street and down the other. And these are held out here at our Western Sydney Records Centre. Our site was in the municipality of St Mary's, but when we go to the list to look for St Mary's, there's only one volume, and that's a dead giveaway that an amalgamation has occurred. And in fact, the records for St Mary's have been moved to become part of the records of Penrith. Now again, it's not going to have any information from before 1926 because the Valuation of Land Act only applied to St Mary's on the 1st of August and to Penrith on the 1st of July 1926. So here's an example of one of those valuation rolls pages, and in fact it is the page for this property. And there is no certificate of title information filled in. We've got lot numbers, but no street numbers. There is a section for values. You've got your unimproved value, which is the value of the land alone. Your improved value, which is the value of the land with houses and fences. And remember, if these are actually the same, then that means there's nothing on the property. But we also get a description of the improvements. So on this property between 1935 and 1953, we had sheds, cow bales, a silo, a milk room, a vineyard. The property was cleared and it was fenced. And as at the 15th of November, 1938, I think that is, there was a double-fronted wooden and fibro cottage with 3 rooms, a kitchen, and an iron roof. Now here is the property just slightly to the west of us. Again, we haven't got any certificate of title information, which is what I wanted these things to give us. We haven't got any street numbers. But this is lots 36 and part of 35. The other one was 144 acres. This is 42 acres. We've got a brick cottage, fibro cement garage, galvanised iron and slabs shed and poultry house, 2 dams, vines, presumably from a vineyard, and it's fenced and cleared. And just to show that I'm not making this up, that in fact these records are meant to have certificate of title detail, here we have a property further to the west of us on the same southern side, and it's the property of the late Charles Henry Edwards. Now, the fact that it says he's the estate of the late means that in fact we might also have a deceased estate for this property, for him, and that might give us further detail. And again, it has volume 3631, folio 81, written down where the certificate of title detail should be. Next to the initials DP, it has a number 23466, followed by the initials RPA. Now that's actually not the DP. The RPA shows that in fact it's the primary application. And again, we should have the primary application here. And you get a description of the property. WIB, which I think is going to be wood, or it might be weatherboard, on brick cottage, 5 rooms, kitchen and outhouse, so at least this place has got a toilet. I'm a bit worried about those other 2 houses. An iron roof, a barn, wooden packing shed, iron roof, wooden shed, iron roof. And as at the 25th of October 35, there was also an orchard, vineyard, galvanised iron shed, and possibly 1941, possibly veranda has been glazed. There's a fernery, a pigsty, and yard, implement shed, and 2 cow bales, and of course it's been fenced and cleared. Now, I just want to talk about a little bit about local government records, if only because before the state government took over valuing of land, the local government areas valued their own land, and they also created records such as valuation books and rate books. Now, these may have information about the land and the building, but I don't think that they have certificate of title numbers, unfortunately. These may still be held by the local government area itself. So the best thing is to actually talk to the local studies section of the local public library in the area, because they may have an understanding of where those records are. But again, just need to remember that it's not till 1905 that local government is made compulsory and therefore extended to cover most of the state. Before 1905, locals had to actually petition the state to be allowed to create a municipality. And if you had a petition for a municipality, if enough people got up a petition against a municipality, then nothing happened. Some people didn't want local government because it meant they didn't have to pay rates. But it also means if there's no local government, there's no valuation and rate books for us to research from. So let's move on to our next set of records, which are the deceased estate files. Now, these were created by the Stamp Duty Office from the 1880s to about 1958, and their purpose was to value the estate so that the government could actually take its cut. So you might want to think of these as like a death duty, an inheritance tax, but it's basically the valuation of the estate so that the government can take a portion of the estate as a stamp duty tax. So here we have the deceased estate for Bernard Musico, who is described as being of Orchard Hills. He died in 1927 and he left land valued at £3,000, £3,750. Now, normally when I go to a deceased estate, particularly one from the 1920s, you get this huge long list of possessions, down to what's in every room, down to the number of teaspoons. We've seen lists of the dairy cows and what their names are. We had one customer come in and their ancestor ran a rodeo show. It had a list of all the horses, their colours and their names. But with Bernard, we actually don't get that list because his furniture belonged to his wife and that was left to his daughter when she died. And he retired 7 years ago, so circa 1920, and he disposed of the horses and the farming equipment that he had. I would also expect that a deceased estate would give me certificate of title numbers. And with Bernard, we don't get certificate of title numbers, except for one lot. So we don't get it for part of lot 36, which is 35 acres. We don't get numbers for lots 35, 34, 33 and part of 32, which is 194 acres and which we're upon. We only get a certificate of title number for a 1 foot reserve, which runs along the side of his property where it meets Caden Road. So we're not doing too well here, folks. And the certificate of valuation, remember it said see Schedule 1 for the certificate of valuation in the previous pages. Again, it doesn't include certificate of title numbers. It tells us all about the brick cottage, 5 rooms, kitchen iron roof, barn shed with iron roof. Again, it gives the address as Orchard Hills, and it gives us our lot numbers and the side of the road we're on, but we still haven't got certificate of title numbers. And of course, don't forget Trove. You can find lots of wonderful information about land and property in Trove. So we've got Bernard's obituary. He actually made quite a lot of papers, not just the Nepean Times, but because he used to live up in the Manning, he also made the Manning paper. And there's a lovely one in the Methodist newspaper as well. But his obituary in the Nepean Times said he came to Orchard Hills in 1900, that he died at his residence Fairland, Orchard Hills, at the age of 86. He was born in Switzerland and he arrived when he was 14. And in 1934, we get a lovely auction sale notice for a splendid dairy farm situated at Orchard Hills, fronting Caden's Road, and known as the Meadows. 145 acres. We've got a large shed of 24 gauge steel, cow bales, feed troughs, dairy, fenced paddocks, 7 paddocks. We've got crops, including oats. It's permanently watered, and there is a milk board licence. And we also have 4 acres of vineyard, all black muscatels, and they're in full bearing. Now, I'm not making this up. When we get deceased estates, we do get certificate of title numbers. So I wanted to show you an example, and this is for John Douglas of Dora Creek, who died in 1916. And here is the valuation of his property in 1917. And we've got vol numbers. We've got the date grant was given. We've got a description of the improvements of the grant as well as the valuation. So on our parish map, we got a primary application number. So why don't we move on to primary applications to see if it actually gives us something? What is a primary application? It's actually the system that converted land granted prior to 1863 under the old system into a Torrens title. And Torrens title is government guaranteed. Old system wasn't. You needed to have all the pieces of land that went along to prove that you actually owned the land. Now, there is a guide on our website, and you can search using our website collection search. So all I've done is put in the PA number, and you'll notice again it's calling it Cadens Road and O'Connell Street in Orchard Hills. So obviously, even in the 1960s, they're not referring to his part of the land as being in Kingswood. So this is the actual application itself to have the property converted in 1966, and we finally have a certificate of title number. So book number 1911, and it's page number 38. But this document also says that it's not, this certificate of title document is not in the possession of the applicants, and nor in the hands of their solicitors. So they actually don't have the document themselves. It also tells us that in 1966, this property is being used as a slaughter yard, and a portion is leased to Hall Brothers Limited from week to week. So here we finally have gone to HLRV and looked at our certificate of title, and it's a 1942 document, and it gives us a schedule which takes us back to 1868. So Bernard Musico bought it in 1907 from the widow of John Allen, and John Allen bought it in 1892 from Theodophilus Palmer, who bought it in 1888 from B. McLaughlin, who bought it in 1868 from A.H. McCulloch. So we're back to 1868, but not to 1810. And there's lots of mortgages and release of mortgages and so on and so forth. So let's go to the primary application packets. Now, normally primary application packets are full of the original certificate of title documents. Not in this case. We've got 84 pages, we've got applications, we've got letters to all the neighbours telling them what's going on, but we also get a lovely map of the property and a statement and declaration which talks about the fact that the cottage was built at least 30 years ago, the slaughterhouse and piggery was built 24 years ago. No street numbers, but the property is called The Meadows. And finally, we get 2 pieces of paper with all the certificate of title numbers on them. Now, I was not expecting this. I was expecting something like we have for portion 14 for Gandal's Farm, which is a little bit further west, where we have those actual certificate of title documents in the primary application documents packet. But not in this case. We just get lists of names and numbers and dates. And again, only back to 1868. Now, there is another place we can go to look for primary application information, and that's on the Historical Land Records Viewer. It's under the section called Old System Records, Primary Applications, and it includes 2 different sets of records. One is the primary application search books, and the other is the primary application search sketches. So we're going to have a look at the search sketch first. And here we have struck gold. We've got a lovely little plan of the property as the poor title examiner tries to actually reconcile descriptions of boundaries from all of the different documents. And we have a list of all the various documents with their certificate of title number. And finally, we go back past Mr. McCulloch in 1868 to the Australian Trust Company, and before that to Mary O'Connell in 1810. So this is a really good find, and of course you didn't actually have to come out here to Kingswood to see this. You can all see this at home from the Historic Land Record Viewer on the New South Wales Land Registry website. And in addition, we get 29 pages of the title examiner's notes as he's tried to reconcile all of these boundaries and descriptions and work out what is going on. I want to draw your attention to the red numbers that start with DD, because these are actually a reference to a deposited deeds packet. Whilst the packet itself is not on Historic Land Record Viewer, although you can purchase copies of these from the New South Wales Land Registry Services via the information brokers, but you can actually go to what's been digitised as the deposited deed notes, and that also gives you a list of all the documents that were deposited and the dates and the number and books. So you could actually use these numbers now to go onto the Historic Land Record Viewer and to look at those documents and see what they are. In some cases, the statutory declarations are not going to be digitised, but you've got numbers now to start with. Just a reminder of what deposited deeds packets are. In 1919, the government decided that you could actually deposit your deeds with the Land Titles Office for a fee. And in 1948, somebody has done this via a firm of solicitors who coincidentally their address is O'Connell Street, Sydney. And this would keep those documents safe so that if in fact you had a flood, fire, drought, some sort of natural catastrophe that wiped out your house, your records were safely stored with land titles. So I'm not quite certain why the musicos didn't remember that actually it was the halls who applied, didn't they? So the halls didn't know that the musicos had actually deposited all these documents in 1948. But there we have this lovely list. And again, you can see this list from Historic Lands Record Viewer by putting in the deposited deeds number. And finally, we often don't look in the obvious places. But on the web, I found this lovely history called From Frogmore Farm to Werrington Park. It's actually a publication on the history of the University of Western Sydney site by Dr. Carol Liston and the late Professor Ian Jack, two of our favourite customers. And we often don't think to maybe try the local studies section of the public library, other local publications in your area, or even the local historical society to give some context to the land. So here we find out that Sir Maurice and Lady O'Connell, and we see another portrait of Mary O'Connell from the State Library of New South Wales, were in financial difficulties and sought to raise cash from their land, first by mortgaging both Frogmore and Collee. All right, so the Mary Putland who had Frogmore is the same person as the Mary O'Connell who has Collee. So eventually they have a mortgage with the Australian Trust Company. Maurice O'Connell dies in Sydney in 1848, and Lady O'Connell goes back to England, Paris and London, where she dies in 1864. They default on the mortgage payments, and so the Australian Trust Company sells up, and it gets sold to Sydney solicitor Andrew Hardy McCulloch, who specialises in acquiring land near railway lines, presumably to make some profit. So in 1855, December 1855, he subdivides Frogmore and Collee into 31 farm allotments and 55 village allotments. And the University of Western Sydney is on the its Werrington site is on there, and so is our site as well. And this publication includes a lovely map from the Mitchell Library, State Library of New South Wales, showing what was on the site in 1855 and how the subdivision was arranged. And here we have the lady herself, Mary Bligh Putland O'Connell, the daughter of one governor, Sir William Bligh, and the wife of an acting governor, Sir Maurice O'Connell. And this is a very interesting article available on the web, which talks about how a couple of weeks after, 3 weeks after the death of her husband, John Putland, she met the soldiers marching with fixed bayonets up Bridge Street, intending to toss out her father, Governor William Bligh, exclaiming, "You traitors, you rebels, you have just walked over my husband's grave and come to murder my father." A very interesting woman indeed, who had a very full life. So just a reminder, where can you find certificate of title numbers? You can find them on parish maps on Historical Land Record Viewer. You can find them in the valuation records created by the New South Wales Valuer General from circa 1916 onwards. You can find them in deceased estate files from the 1880s to the 1950s. And you can find them on primary application records, both here at State Library and on the Historical Land Record Viewer. So we are in History Week 2020. So just some thoughts on history and History Week to conclude. History's not the past, it's the questions we asked about the past. That's why history keeps changing, because our questions changed. It can be personal, it can be local, it can be national or international. And this is because we live with the consequences of decisions made in the past, and we need to ask why. One of my questions has now been answered. So when I get those late afternoon telephone calls asking where we are, they've driven to the end of our street, but they can only find houses and a park, I know who to blame for the 90-degree turn in O'Connell Street. Thank you, Andrew McCulloch, for a decision made in 1855 that has echoed down time. So keep those questions coming. Just remember that State Archives is not able to do the research for you. After all, you are the historian. But we can advise you if we hold sources that can help answer your questions. And also remember that sometimes you just have to take the 90-degree turn to get to where you need to be, even if getting sidetracked onto the straight ahead road looks to seem more logical.